Today, we're going to talk about the most culturally significant period of Black history. And it's going to be something that a lot of my Black friends have never even heard about. I know because I've asked them already and they haven't. And I don't blame you because I don't remember this ever being taught to me in school. In fact, this was a period that forever changed American entertainment, American music, and is so significant for the entire world. This is something that was an explosion of Black literature, Black art, Black directors, Black writing, Black authors, intellectuals, especially music. The music of Louis Armstrong and Duke Ellington and the greats, okay? This is what changed American music forever. And so today, in honor of Black History Month, we're not just going to focus on the victimization and the slavery. We're going to talk about what happened directly after that. We're going to talk about what gave the Black community a true identity from a North American perspective and then from around the world. Today, we're going to talk about something called the Harlem Renaissance. And I am here with another episode of the Promain show, and this one is in honor of Black History Month. It's something very close to my heart because when I grew up in a house where my mom, she sang jazz. I saw these black and white photos of jazz musicians. I grew up around it. And, you know, honestly, I've been looking online and I haven't seen a lot of people posting a lot about Black History Month. I mean, I know we don't just limit it to a month, but I mean, I'm not seeing it. So the light-skinned brother's going to have to handle that for y'all. And of course, as a note to all the viewers out there who are not Black, it may surprise you to learn that I am Black. And of course, throughout my entire life, I've never had a Black person be surprised to learn that I'm Black. Of course, they know I'm Black because they're Black too. But for some reason, people who are not Black, sometimes they're very surprised to learn that I am Black, I guess because of my skin color, eye color, etc. So what was the Harlem Renaissance, which was originally called the New Negro Movement? Well, after the Civil War, this may surprise a lot of people, but Blacks were given voting rights. And they began to vote. And because they made up 40% of the population, they were a force to be reckoned with at the polls. Of course, this upset the Southern political establishment greatly because they were not able to win political victories against the Blacks. So thus began a systematic campaign to disenfranchise the Black voter once again. And so the South had become an increasingly inhospitable environment for the Black community, and so thus began a period called the Great Migration. And so many Blacks had left the South and had gone up to the North to Chicago or Detroit or New York, in particularly Harlem. And that in addition to, somewhat to the West Coast as well, to LA. But those are the three main cities, Detroit, Chicago, and New York. And so they had gone to Harlem, and with the addition of Blacks from the Caribbean diaspora, they had joined them in Harlem. And thus began the 1920s, a period that was an explosion of the full blossoming of the creative and unique spirit of people who had been previously enslaved for hundreds of years. And so this was the first time that they were able to carve out an identity for themselves and come together to create that. And so this is a time also when Black people were looked at as nothing more than farmers and just uneducated farmers, people with no history and no roots. And of course, this invited African Americans to shatter those stereotypes. And they were people who had poise, they had class, they spoke well, and there was Black directors, there was all Black casts on Broadway. We had Black authors, with Black musicians, and it was just a full explosion of that whole art form. And the world had started to see the Black community differently. You see, because there's three components that have to take place for a renaissance to happen. The first thing that you need are the artists. The second thing that you need is a guiding force to channel that creative energy. And the third thing that you need is the patrons. And the Harlem Renaissance could not have happened if it wasn't for the white viewers and the white community who had come out to the clubs to support this art form that was growing. They had to like it because then it became popular by them liking it. So by the sheer infectious art form, they were able to gain political victories. The Black community was able to gain political victories and more civil rights through art, through expression And so this is a very, very powerful lesson, which is the main reason why I wanted to focus on this today, because politics is one thing, but what moves peoples more is art, and that would be either art or music or entertainment. And so entertainment is upstream from politics when it comes to creating a culture and changing minds. And so this is a very important thing. If you want to make a political statement, and you make a song, well, people are going to be way more receptive to that song or that painting or that play than they are to some guy getting in front of the camera and talking for 10 minutes like me. But for me, myself, this is why I take pride in the fact that I don't just make YouTube videos or political statements. I also make music and I also write. But let's get into the key figures of this movement, and we're going to try to make it all happen within 15 minutes because I really want you guys to watch till the end, especially my black friends, and especially everybody, actually. Because I say my black friends because I really want everybody to truly understand, like, the pride behind this whole movement, what it did for American culture, for American entertainment, how we can look to it as an example, as something to be proud of, and not just the slavery side. We can focus on the fact that there was a culture there was black people who were together as a community and seemed to be doing well in that regard. There was still lots of victories to be officially won back with the whole civil rights movement, but even the civil rights movement of the 60s was highly influenced. Martin Luther King was highly influenced by W.E.B. Du Bois. To other viewers of different backgrounds, when they see this, they also get something so that they can understand the black roots and culture of North America as well. So let's take a look at some pictures from back then and kind of get a glimpse into what life was like back then, how people acted and dressed. The fashion was big back then to me. I mean, just the way people dressed when you talk about some of the leopard prints and furs, for instance, because there's a connection. That is how people dressed in Africa with those furs. So that's a little bit of roots and culture for you there. Getting into some of the key figures of the Harlem Renaissance, some of the intellectuals of the movement were Marcus Garvey and W.E.B. Du Bois. He was a scholar and civil rights activist. He was the editor of the NAACP's monthly magazine, and we all know who the NAACP is. He was the editor of the monthly magazine called The Crisis, a record of the darker races. And so this provided a platform within the black community to showcase their abilities amongst each other, but then this would lead eventually to wider audiences as well. So through this platform, black sculptors, painters, authors, playwrights, actors, filmmakers, philosophers, musicians were all able to come together and showcase their arts. So black intellectuals and proponents of this movement saw these art forms as ways to do away with the stereotypes that blacks were only good for menial work and manual labor. So the movement invited blacks to shatter stereotypes, increase visibility, and uplift fellow blacks. And so this was the platform, the channel that was used. So in this monthly magazine that Du Bois put forward, there were these playwriting contests and awards that allowed for the black story to be told on stage in front of larger audiences, because at that time it was still the only art form that black people could still control their own narrative. This led to a lot of black-owned theater companies being created with all-black casts, and gave a big platform for plays, and some even ended up on Broadway with all-black casts. So once again, the goal of the movement was to use art as a way for the black community to get broader civil support, which then changes the culture, which then leads to more political rights, which eventually did happen 40 years later. Many of the key figures from the Harlem Renaissance were very active in the 1960s when full civil rights were finally granted. So a lot of these key figures from the Harlem Renaissance were still front row and center and speaking up in the 1960s. W.E.B. Du Bois' NAACP magazine led to the rise of prolific writers like Zora Neale Hurston and poet Langston Hughes. Both of these writers won different contests and awards from Du Bois' publication. So as the movement continued, more whites started to get on board, and then came a man named William E. Harmon, who was a wealthy real estate developer. He was white, and he came on the scene and created the Harmon Foundation in 1922. Originally, the foundation focused on building playgrounds and nursing homes to assist black neighborhoods, but then it was later known for providing a platform for black artists and sculptors to showcase their unseen works, because until then, it had only been seen mostly within the black community. Harmon knew that by helping blacks to make more economic gains, it wouldn't just be good for them, but it would be better for the country as a whole. Because, you see, he was a stone cold capitalist, and he saw the future in this thing as a money-making machine. And make money he did. But his platform is what allowed for the Harlem Renaissance to be brought to the attention of the country, and then later to the world. The foundation, the Harmon Foundation, set up local exhibits and countrywide tours all across the country that brought these black artists to white audiences for the first time ever. So coming from this literary world, plays and Broadway, on the scene came a director named Oscar Micheaux. Oscar Micheaux was regarded as the best black director and independent filmmaker for the first half of the 20th century, all the way up until 1950. His works include Within Our Gates and Murder in Harlem. So these are just two of his 44 films. All 44 of Oscar Micheaux's films were met with critical and commercial success. Okay, all 44 of them. So that just goes to show you his massive role in the movement. The thing about his films was that his characters were not just the shucksters and nannies that were found inside white films. You know, they had poise, they had class, they had elegance, they spoke well. It was a glimpse inside what real black life was like, and not just the stereotypes that were put forward in white theater. So the world was able to see the black community through this lens. And so while black elites and intellectuals of that period embraced these many art forms, there was still some reservations between them towards jazz music, which by large part had been brought up from the South. So jazz music, even within the black community, was not the preferred method of what the elites wanted to use to further the black cause in society. But it did prove the most effective, because it was what really, brought black culture to the forefront of America and began America's musical takeover of the world. American music was black music. So jazz proved too infectious for people to resist. And so whites began pouring in droves to see shows and frequent black clubs all over Manhattan. And this is what provided the final ingredient for the Renaissance, which was the patrons. So whites who wanted to have a good time and enjoy being a part of something new and exciting and cool, all of a sudden we're hanging out in these black clubs with black people, getting along, having a good time, and partying until, wee hours of the morning. So the very significance of this, I think, has been lost on a lot of people, because this, in effect, is what ended segregation, or at least was the first instances of segregation being ended, because now you had an environment in which blacks and whites were having a good time together and were thus really able to learn from each other at this point now for the first time pretty much in history. And so to me, jazz was definitely the thing that was the most influential in changing hearts and minds and creating an environment and culture for widespread acceptance of African Americans. And, it's what really broke down barriers worldwide. Some notable musicians from that period were Jelly Roll Morton, Fats Waller, Louis Armstrong, and Mr. Duke Ellington. Some singers included Bessie Smith, Lena Horne, and of course Billie Holiday. Billie Holiday came more towards the end of the 20s. It was more like 1929 or something, but we have to include her with the movement for sure. So, you guys can definitely check out some of those names that I mentioned here the singers, the artists, Oscar Michaud's movies, because, there's just so much material that I could go for hours. And there's plenty of names that I haven't mentioned here, but these are definitely the key ones. So that's all you really need to take a dive into this on your own if you're interested. And so the reason why I decided to name this episode The Black Renaissance is because although I do respect and revere and acknowledge that it is called the Harlem Renaissance, I should like to put it forward that we call it the Black Renaissance because it just seems more universal, Although it did start in Harlem, it's something that became countrywide, you know what I mean? And Black people took to it as a whole, not just countrywide. Some other nations as well came in, and it became a unique identity worldwide, especially music-wise, as we were mentioning before with the whole advent of jazz music, which was very influential on rock and roll after the blues, and then hip-hop, which came in after. So this is all from that huge cultural movement, and it can be strongly argued that this is how Black people were always supposed to be, because like I was mentioning before, after slavery, when they got together, this is what they created. And so it can be strongly argued that this is always who they were supposed to be because it happened directly after the shackles of slavery were loosened. And so, once again, as a self-proclaimed Black intellectual, I should like to put forward the notion that we also refer to this movement as the Black Renaissance, and thus the title of this episode. But what do you think about the Harlem Renaissance? Is it something that you guys had heard of? Is it something that you heard of and maybe didn't know much about? I'm really curious, actually curious to see what you guys think about it. Did you know about it? If not, what are your thoughts? And should I actually do another one of these episodes for Black History Month next week as well? Because I bet you I can also, my brand is taking a topic and then bringing something that is not necessarily popular knowledge about that topic. So that's my specialty, that's my brand, that's what I always try to do. But do you guys want to see me do that again, or proclaim that I'm doing that, assuming nobody's really heard about this movement this week? Do you want to see me do that again next week? And please don't forget to like the video if you guys learned something, if you found value in this episode. I hope you did. All you have to do if you want to support me is just hit the like button, and you can share this with friends and family. I mean, all my Black peoples, I think you guys should love this episode. And I definitely think that you should share it with your peoples. And that's not just because I want people to get views on this video. Sure, that's one reason. But I also want this information to be shared, and I want people to really be happy and have some pride and really, look to this thing as like, wow, that's really interesting stuff. All right, so I'll see you guys next Thursday. Thank you so much for watching. And if you guys want to know more about last week's episode, which was hyperinflation, check out the video here. And the week before that, I did something on silver, and where I talk about a good way to buy a home with silver when it's happened in the past. And if you just want to know about precious metals as an investment, you can check out this video right here. All right, so you guys have a good night. Thank you so much for watching, and Black Renaissance, baby.